Firstly, supreme and infallible judge upon earth we know none, and I hope from what hath been said and proved at large it appears that there is none, at least the Pope and Council and Church of Rome is none. Secondly, an external political judge in the Church we willingly acknowledge and reverently esteem, the true and rightful governors of the Church orderly assembled, and proceeding regularly in councils, whether lesser or larger, are the external judge whose decisions are to be highly valued, whose orders are not rashly to be despised or contradicted. Yet 3 cautions we must interpose. Number 1, that this judge is not infallible, but subject to error. Number 2, that this judge being subject to an higher authority and tied to an higher rule, if its decisions or commands be manifestly repugnant to the superior authority and rule, they are not to be received and obeyed. Thirdly, that this judge is constituted by God in the Church, not for the command of men's consciences, but for the regulation of their actions, and for the preservation of the peace of the Church, which is not violated by men's inward and unknown sentiments, but by their external demeanor and sensible effects of them. And therefore this is abundantly sufficient for the preservation of order and peace in the Church. Thirdly, every man's own reason and conscience is judge for himself, and for the guidance of his own actions. State it in this manner, and I know no hurt at all in making reason a judge. Christ himself, when he preached in the world, he propounds the articles of faith to the reason of his hearers, and calls upon every one of them to judge, so far as concerned by his own apprehensions or actions. Luke 12, verse 57, Yea, and why even of yourselves judge you not what is right? Christ nowhere commands his hearers blindly to submit to the decrees of the present judge, their church, the high priest and council, but calls upon them to judge for themselves, to beware of the leaven, that is, the false doctrine of their rulers, Matthew 16, verse 12, and, which is more, refers his own doctrine to their fear thing, which is an act of reason, John 5, verse 39, search the Scriptures. But alas, this reason is imperfect and corrupt, and dim-sighted in matters of faith. Therefore something farther is necessary. Therefore, proposition 4th, that reason may be a competent judge of matters of faith, it is necessary that it be assisted and elevated by the Spirit of God, whereby of the rational he is made a spiritual man, and eo nomine, a fit judge of such affairs, 1 Corinthians 2, verse 15, he that is spiritual judgeth all things, as that a man may exactly see those heavenly bodies, which are at a great distance from us. It is necessary to look upon them through a glass, without which a man could not discern many of them. So are the aids of God's Spirit to help our purblind reason, which without these could not discern things afar off, according to 2 Peter 1, verse 9. Proposition 5th. The Holy Scriptures of the Old and New Testament are the infallible rule and ground and touchstone of faith, by which both churches and all particular persons are to be regulated in their faith and manners, from which all controversies of faith are to be decided and judged, to which all are perfectly subordinate, by which all the opinions of men and decisions of councils are to be examined, and they that swerve from and are opposite to this rule are ipso facto null and void, and so to be esteemed by all Christians. I rather call it a rule than a judge, because there is an hanc mes logoia in the word, the appellation of judge by common use being appropriated to persons, but it is the voice and writing of our sovereign Lord, and judge by which all inferior judges are to be guided in their decrees. Proposition 6th. Universal tradition, rightly understood, that is, the concurring testimony of all churches and ages and persons in their writings left us, is of great use and force, and is the vehiculum or channel by which that Scripture, which alone is our rule, is conveyed to us. But here I must add these 2 cautions. First, tradition, though necessary to convey the rule to us, yet is no part of the rule. I must here distinguish between res tradita, the thing delivered, and traditio, the tradition or delivery of it. If tradition be understood in the former sense, as the papists understand it, for certain unscriptural doctrines delivered by tradition, we know no such thing, and by comparing the boldness of their pretensions to such tradition with the weakness of their proofs and evidences, we plainly discern they can make out no such thing. But if tradition be taken for the conveyance or delivery itself, or for the testimony of the Church successively given to the truths and books of the Scripture, we confess it is of great use, and in some sort necessary, to bring the rule to us. Yet, as I say, it is no part of the rule. As that bread which nourisheth me, it is necessary that it be brought to me in some basket or other vehiculum. Yet it is the bread alone, not the basket, which nourisheth me. The water of such a remote but excellent spring which quencheth my thirst could not come to me if there were not a channel to convey it. Yet it is the water alone which refresheth me, not the channel. The decrees or acts of king and parliament are the only rule by which our foreign plantations are governed, and to which such as are judges they are tied. Yea, so far tied that if those judges should impose contrary commands, as for example if they should command the people to rebel against the king, they are bound not only to examine their commands, but to disobey them. But it is altogether necessary that there should be a ship wherein such acts or decrees should be conveyed to them. Yet it were a very absurd thing to say that the ship is part of the rule. Though the papists, whilst from the necessity of tradition they infer that it is a part of the rule, do apparently run into the same solecism. In a word, tradition was not appointed by Christ as a part of that ground upon which we were to build our rule, by which we were to try particular doctrines and articles of faith, but was necessary, not lex instituto Christi, but ex naturari, from the condition of human affairs, there being no other way, without new revelation, possible or imaginable to convey the gospel and scriptures to those that were to live so many 100 years after the first publication of it. Tradition being to us that which eyes and ears were to them that were eye-witnesses of his convincing miracles, and ear-witnesses of his irrefragable discourses, that is, neither their eyes and ears were. Nor to us tradition is the argument and ground of our faith, but a necessary mean or instrument to convey those arguments and grounds of Scripture which were convincing and satisfactory. Secondly, this tradition is no act of authority, but only of testimony, not at all peculiar to the Church or general councils, but common to all ancient writers. Yea, let it be observed as a very small material consideration in this point, so far is the capacity of a Church from being necessary to the validity of this tradition and testimony. Concerning the great rule of our faith, the Holy Scriptures, that the testimony and tradition of such as neither are the Church nor any part of it, but enemies to it, I mean Jews and heathens, are in some respects more considerable, according to that known maxim, testimonium adversari contra se est validissimum, it being one of the best arguments, and at this day so urged both by Protestants and Papists, for the truth of the Holy Scriptures and particularly of the Gospel, that the truth of those historical relations of Christ's miracles was acknowledged by the most learned Jews and heathens that lived in ancient times. And by those considerations, we may discern the vanity of that trivial calumny of the great differences among Protestants about the rule of faith and judge of controversies. Whereas, by what hath been said, which is no other than the common doctrine of the Protestant churches and writers, however sometimes they seem to differ in modo explicandi, it appears how all these several things concur like so many stones fitly compacted together to make up the building of our faith, which, that I may in a few words present it to the reader's review, in this. The Scripture is the object, the only rule and standard of faith, by which all controversies of faith are to be decided and judged, the res credite and the ratio credendi. Tradition is the vehicle to convey this rule to us in our times. Reason is the instrument by which I apprehend, or the eye by which I discern or see this rule. The Spirit of God is the eye salve that anoints mine eye and enables it to see this rule. The Church is the interpreter, though not infallible and authentic, the witness, the guardian of this rule, and the applier of the general rules of Scripture to particular cases and times and circumstances. And things being thus stated, which is really the sense of Protestants in this great point, as it were easy to show from the confessors of our churches and the treatises of our most and choicest authors, is it not at all difficult to blow away with a breath those pitiful cavils whereby they endeavor to perplex the mind of ignorant or prejudiced persons, lest the light of the gospel should shine into their minds, One thing is worth our observation, that diverse of the popish arguments do wholly arise from and depend upon either some incommodious expressions of some Protestant writers, or some false exposition put upon them by the adversaries, as for instance when they argue against the Scripture from the nature of a judge, that a judge must hear parties, must not be mute, but pass sentence, etc. All these and many such cavillations are thus silenced by saying that which is true, that it is an akurologi and figurative expression when we call Scripture a judge, inasmuch as it is the voice or writing of our judge, and indeed it is a rule.